or purpose for that appointment?
Birth control refill.
And you said that was a refill?
Yes.
Doctor, on that date, were you aware that she had previously seen one of your colleagues, Dr. Andrew?
Yes.
And that that appointment occurred on April 26th of 2017?
Yes.
When you, prior to that, the actual appointment on July 12th, what information did you have about the prior appointment on April 26th?
Dr. Andrew took me in a little conference room and told me that he had seen her previously and that she had been pregnant.
Did he indicate to you at that previous appointment that she had come in for birth control at that time as well?
Yes.
And you said that she was pregnant?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that he was the doctor that had in fact confirmed the pregnancy for her?
Yes.
Do you have any understanding as to why she wasn't returning to him on this appointment on July 12th?
I did not know why.
Okay. And did he give you any information about her demeanor at that prior appointment?
He said she was tearful and upset when she was told she was pregnant.
Okay. Did he give you any indication about whether or not she had made statements about not being able to have that baby or not being able to tell anyone about the baby?
He had said that she had said not to tell her mom.
Okay. Did you have any understanding after he had diagnosed or confirmed her pregnancy on April 26th as to whether or not she scheduled any of the follow-up appointments that he wanted her to have?
She had not been seen at our practice since that appointment.
Okay, thank you. So on that date, how did you first come into contact with Ms. Richardson?
I went in the exam room to see her like I do every other patient.
Had she already been checked in by another nurse?
By the medical assistant, yes.
Medical assistant, would that have been Ashley Sparkman?
Correct, yes.
Did Ashley give you any information that she had obtained when she checked Ms. Richardson in prior to you going into the exam room?
I don't remember her saying anything other than she is here and she's ready for you to see her.
Okay. Did she give you any indication of whether or not she still appeared to be pregnant?
She did say she doesn't look pregnant.
Okay. And did she give you any indication about what her demeanor was or how she was acting in the exam room?
I don't remember.
Okay, thank you. After speaking with Ashley, did you then go into the exam room yourself?
Yes.
And when you go in there, how does the conversation start? Walk us through it, if you will.
I walk in, I always introduce myself, say I'm Dr. Casey Boyce, it's nice to see you. I sit down, I say what brings you in today, and she says to get a refill on her birth control, and then I say, okay, I'll be happy to do that, but you know I have to ask you, the last time you were here you were pregnant and you're no longer pregnant. What happened?
And how did she respond at that time, doctor?
She started crying.
And did she give you any indication as to what happened to the child that she was pregnant with on April 26th?
Yes, she started sobbing, and she said, I had it alone in my house, and I buried it in my backyard.
And when you heard this information from her, what did you do in response?
I asked a few more questions. I was kind of in a state of shock. I said, does anyone know about this? And she said, no. I said, no one heard you have the baby? She said, no. I said, labor is incredibly painful. And she started crying harder and said, yes, it's awful. I said, no one knows. And she said, no. And I said, I'm the first person on the planet you've ever told? Yes. She said she cleaned everything up and buried it in the backyard and nobody knew.
Okay. Let me go through that with you a little bit. When you tried to ask her some questions to ascertain what had happened, did she indicate to you when she started cramping or when she believed she was going into labor?
Sometime earlier that day.
Okay. And did she indicate to you, do you recall when she had the baby?
In the middle of the night.
And would that have been on May 7th of 2017?
That's what she said, yes. May
Okay.
7th in the middle of the night.
So she she has the baby May 7th, 2017 in the middle of the night, started cramping earlier that day.
Yes.
And did she indicate to you at that time when she started cramping earlier that day that she knew or had suspicion of what was happening?
Yes, she said she had felt some pain and kind of knew what was going to happen.
Okay. And then she goes into labor in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Okay. Did she indicate to you where in the house she had the baby?
I don't remember that anymore.
You don't remember that anymore? What do you mean?
We just rewatched the statement that I made to the police.
Mm-hmm.
And in the statement to the police, I said in her bedroom. I don't remember those details anymore.
Okay. Well, it's been 2 years, correct?
Correct.
It's been a long time. Actually, we're more than 2 years out at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But you said and let me back up for a little. You recall giving a statement to the police at the time the investigation occurred?
Correct.
And it was recorded?
Correct.
And that interview or statement that you gave to the police, you would agree it was, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it was made within days of you making a report to the police?
Correct.
Okay. And you said you've had an opportunity to review that recording?
Yes.
And when you made that statement within days of having that appointment, that interaction with the defendant, you recalled her telling you that the child was born in the bedroom?
That's what I said
Okay.
then.
And then after that, what did she say next?
I don't remember the exact sequence of details,
To the best that you can.
but I did offer to do a physical exam, and she declined. And I said that there can be some, I don't know what word I used then, some trauma or changes, and she declined, and I did not push it. And I encouraged her to get counseling because this was something that she would need professional help for.
Okay. When she said that she buried everything, did she tell you what everything was?
Not that I remember.
You don't know if that included, and I'll start using some terms here, but the placenta, the afterbirth, all of those
I
things?
don't remember that she used any details, just everything.
Everything was buried?
Yeah.
And that was in her backyard?
Yes.
Did she ever make any statements to you about the condition of the umbilical cord?
She did not.
She never made a statement about it being wrapped around the baby's neck?
No.
She never made a statement about it not being attached to the baby?
No, not that I recall.
Or a statement about it not being attached to the placenta?
No.
No statements. You said that you asked her who else knew. Did she indicate if other people were home at the time?
Yes, I asked her if there was anyone else in the house, and she said yes.
And do you remember questioning her or asking her about how it was possible that no one would have heard her? Because as you said, it's a painful experience.
Yes. I said, I think that's when I brought up, it's an incredibly painful, awful process. And she said yes. And I said, no one heard you, no one knew. And she said no.
Do you recall her telling you that she did not want anyone to know?
I don't remember her ever saying she didn't want anyone to know, but she didn't want me to tell anyone about that I knew.
Okay. And you said when you explained to her that it was an awful, very painful process?
Correct. Labor.
And she agreed with you that it was?
Yes.
Did she give you any indication how she was able to remain silent throughout that process?
She did not.
Okay. And doctor, I'm going to assume most people in the jury have some experience with childbirth, but when you say it's a very awful, painful experience, what do you mean?
When you go through childbirth, it is almost considered a trauma. Your uterus is a big, huge muscle. It contracts. Those contractions are very painful. The baby's head and shoulders delivering out through the birth canal, through the vagina. That area has never been stretched that far. It's very painful. You can have significant tears. It's just a painful, traumatic experience, change in your body.
And in your experience as a doctor, how many babies have you delivered?
In my lifetime?
in your lifetime?
I don't know. Probably 1,000.
Okay. When there is no medication or numbing agent or anything like that used, is it typically a quiet experience?
Usually not, unless they're very motivated, and usually not.
Thank you. And so as she's sharing this information with you, I believe you said you asked her, so nobody knows, I'm the first person.
Yes.
And she confirmed that since May 7th, she had not disclosed to anyone that she had given birth to a child,
Correct.
or that that child was buried in the backyard.
Correct.
You said that you then told her you wanted to perform an internal examination. And why is that, doctor? What is your concern at that time, and why do you think that an internal examination is necessary?
As I said, when you have a childbirth, sometimes the area is stretched. You can have a laceration or tear, and usually we repair that at the time. So I just wanted to make sure that her perineum, her body, her vagina had healed properly from the delivery.
And you said that she declined to let you perform that exam?
Correct.
Did she give you any explanation as to why she would not let you perform the exam?
No, she just said no, and I wasn't going to push it.
When you said that you weren't going to push it, was that because you had no concerns about the physical state of her body, or just because of her mental state at that point?
Because she was so upset, and everything, it had been so far out. People were completely healed 6 weeks out, so there's not really anything that I could do to help at that point in time.
Doctor, did you ultimately refill her prescription for the birth control?
I did.
And then you said after that you gave her some counseling or some advice?
I told her that she should seek counseling and professional help because this was a traumatic psychological event, and that she would need help to cope and get past this.
After that visit or that appointment concluded, did you have any further contact with her?
No.
After she left that day, did you have a conference with Dr. Andrew again?
I did.
And did you ultimately confer with legal counsel?
We did.
And did you make a decision based on the information that Dr. Andrew had and the information that you had to notify the police?
Correct, yes.
Your Honor, if I may have one moment.
You may. Mr. Rickers, you may inquire.
Good afternoon, Dr. Boyce.
Good afternoon.
It's a common part of your practice to have the different doctors in your group see the same patient, right?
Correct, yes.
And it is typical that you and Dr. Andrew might both, on separate occasions, see the same patient.
Yes.
When Skylar described what happened on May 7th, she described a dead baby, correct?
Correct.
And she did not have to come back to Hilltop on July 12th, right?
No.
But she did.
Yes.
And she gave you the exact date when she had the delivery, correct?
Yes, May 7th.
And she told you that she buried her in her backyard, correct?
Correct.
And when she told you about her stillbirth, you believed her, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection. The jury will disregard that last response.
When she told you about her baby, she actually cried visible tears, correct?
Yes.
And people in your office, on your staff, could hear her sobbing through the walls of the exam room, correct?
Correct.
And that's while she was describing her stillbirth.
Correct.
And when you talked to the police in July or August of 2017, you just repeated things from memory and didn't think that the prosecutor's office might make a big deal about whether or not Skylar said in the bedroom or bathroom. Is that right?
Correct.
And now, thinking back on it, you don't know what Skylar told you about where she had her baby. Is that right?
I do not remember that detail.
The prosecutor asked you if Skylar said she never had to cut the umbilical cord. Do you remember that question?
What was your question?
She asked you if Skylar said, I didn't have to cut the cord. The
Correct.
prosecutor asked you that.
Correct.
Did you ask her if she had to cut the cord?
I did not.
Did you ask her any specifics about the umbilical cord?
I did not.
You practiced a Hilltop for how long?
12. That's an approximate guess, yes.
Okay, about 1,000, a lot.
A lot.
And you see a number of pregnant women as part of your weekly practice, correct?
Yes.
As part of your weekly practice, I want to talk to you a little bit about fundal height measurements.
Okay.
Do you use this tape when you take a fundal height measurement as part of your weekly practice?
Yes.
And when do you take a fundal height measurement?
After 20 weeks.
And how often after 20 weeks would you take a fundal height measurement?
Usually every appointment.
Why is that important?
The fundal height, which is a measurement from the top of the pubic bone to the top of the uterus, should measure within 2 centimeters of the number of weeks of a patient.
And if it's smaller by outside of 2 centimeters, what does that indicate to you?
That the baby might be smaller than it should be.
And can that be a problem?
Yes.
Records are critical in your practice, is that correct?
Correct.
Record keeping?
Yes.
In your practice, you keep records electronically, correct?
Correct.
And all of your doctors practice the same or similar record keeping techniques, correct?
I'm exact as to what other doctors do.
Overall, go ahead and answer.
Correct.
And if someone were to write down in a chart fundal height 32 centimeters, what does that tell you as a doctor?
That the pregnancy should be between 30 and 34 weeks along.
And this sounds like a very obvious question, but that fundal height 32 centimeters in a record, what does that tell you about the patient's fundal height?
That he measured it, and that's what he got.
Thank you. Would you write some specific number in a chart if you didn't take a measurement?
No.
And that's because you rely on charts and notations every day as part of your good practice.
Correct.
And you're aware that on April 26th, Skylar was measuring 32 centimeters, correct?
That is what Dr. Andrew wrote.
And he also took a US transabdominal. That's an ultrasound.
Ultrasound.
And in that, he also measured 32 centimeters. Is that right?
Yes. Or 32 weeks.
32 weeks.
Yes.
Yes.
He didn't measure anything as 32 centimeters.
Thank you. Thank you. And we all know now that May 7th, when Skylar delivered, was actually only 11 days later, right?
Correct.
And so if Skylar was full term, 11 days later, was that fundal height measurement of 32 off by greater than 2 centimeters?
Yes.
Much smaller.
Correct.
And as part of your everyday practice, you stay up to date with medical literature, correct?
Yes.
And in your 12 years of experience, you've had a lot of experience with different types of pregnancies, correct?
Yes.
What can you tell us what the concerns would be if someone is growth restricted, intrauterine growth restriction?
If the baby is small, which is what intrauterine growth restriction means, the baby is smaller, measuring smaller than the number of weeks or the gestation that you think the baby is, then you are concerned that of why that is, and if the placenta is not working as well, and if the baby's not getting the nutrition that it needs.
Is the baby at a higher risk for a stillbirth?
Yes.
Is there more likely less amniotic fluid?
There can be, not always, but yes,
It's more likely.
sometimes. They go hand in hand.
Would be more likely with growth restriction that there could be a weaker umbilical cord.
It can be something that goes hand in hand with it, but it's not always growth restriction in the small cord.
Okay. And if someone measures 4 to 6 centimeters too small on a fundal height measurement, that's a significant, much greater risk of a stillbirth. Is that correct?
Yes, it's more concerning the more centimeters it's off by.
And a stillbirth baby would be white, correct?
Yes,
Eyes closed.
usually.
Sometimes the cord not attached.
I've never had that.
Okay. What does that tell you if the cord is not attached to the placenta?
The cord is what gets all the baby's oxygen and nutrition from the placenta to the baby.
What would it tell you if the placenta delivered at the exact same time or right after the baby?
That's not normal. It can mean an abruption. Abruption is when the placenta lets loose from the uterus. And again, if that happens, the baby's not getting the nutrition that it needs. It can mean that maybe that stillbirth happened a while ago, and so it all came out at the same time.
And when we say a while ago, we're talking like several hours, not like weeks, correct?
Correct. Yes, hours or days.
Okay. I'd like you to take us all into the delivery room.
Okay.
Imagine you're standing there right now. What do you often see in a delivery room?
There's the patient on the bed, her family. The patient has a nurse. There's usually a tech that sets up my table and is there to support the nurse. There's a nursery nurse for the baby and a respiratory therapist for the baby. There's the computers for the nurses, and there is the computers for the fetal heart rate tracing.
And what instruments do you have ready at hand as a doctor?
There's a whole table. I have 2 sets of clamps, 2 sets of scissors, laps, towels. I have a gown, gloves, syringes, basins to put things in.
I want to talk, you mentioned placental abruption. Now, placental abruption, it can be chronic, correct?
Correct.
What's that mean?
That the patient has some bleeding, but the baby looks okay and is growing okay. That just a little bit of the placenta lets go, so they're graded by percentages.
And if there's a reported bleeding in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, is that a cause for concern?
We usually have the patients come in if they have bleeding.
Have you had the experience of delivering mothers who've had delivering babies who are stillborn?
Yes.
And how many babies do you think your whole practice delivers in any given week?
We deliver 2 to 3 babies a day, so 14 to 21 on average.
And sometimes you could deliver as many as like 3 stillborns in 1 week.
Sometimes 3 in 1 week, and sometimes not for several months.
May I have 1 moment, Your Honor?
Okay.
About the cord and details. I just want to make sure we're clear. You had no discussion. You never asked Skylar about the umbilical cord.
Correct. I never asked her any specific questions about the umbilical cord.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Read her up.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, you were not present for the April 26th appointment, correct?
Correct.
So you do not know what happened in that examination room?
Correct.
And if, not talking about what's usual or customary, talking about what is, okay?
Okay.
If Dr. Andrew gave a statement to the investigator saying that he never used this measuring tape, but that he used his hands and did the fundal height measurement he approximated with his hands, you don't know that not to be true, do you?
I don't, correct.
And so just because there's a number of 32 centimeters in the documentation from the examination on April 26th, you yourself have no personal knowledge of how that was obtained.
Correct, I do not.
And so if he says hands, you would accept that as true?
Yes.
Objection. It's
Overruled.
Now, when she asking you, did she?
Correct, no.
About the color of the baby.
No.
She didn't tell you white, pink, gray, dusky, any of that?
No.
Did she, when she told you everything was buried, I think I asked you this, she didn't tell you what everything is.
Correct.
She never gave you any specific information as to when the placenta and the afterbirth and everything came out?
Correct.
So you have only the information that she chose to provide to you on that day?
Correct.
And when the defense asks you if she didn't have to come back to your practice, you said correct. But would it also be fair to say you don't know what her family arrangements are with her mom?
Correct.
You don't know what their insurance arrangements are?
Correct.
You don't know who was involved in making or scheduling any of the appointments?
Correct, I have no idea.
So from a technical sense, she's not obligated to come back to you, but that's as much as you would know about why she would or wouldn't return.
Correct.
This fundal height measurement that was done with the hands and the abdominal ultrasound, and we've heard some testimony that they...
objection. That's not the testimony. They did it with his hand.
The objection is overruled. Go ahead and finish your question.
Thank you. We've heard from Dr. Andrew that they corroborated each other, that they corresponded late third trimester or into the third trimester, I guess. You would agree that those are both screening tools,
Yes, approximates.
approximate. They're not definitive,
Correct.
and that's perhaps why Dr. Andrew wanted to get the more formal ultrasound so he could get measurements, bone length, a multitude of measurements to determine exactly what the age of the child was.
Correct.
And you're aware that that never occurred?
Correct, yes.
And when we say that these measurements are screening tools or they're not definite, would you agree that sometimes they can be off by 3 to 4 centimeters?
If the gestation and the fundal height are off by more than 2 centimeters, then we get an ultrasound to get a definitive answer.
Which you weren't able to do in this case, correct?
Correct.
So you don't know if they were or were not off by more than 3 centimeters,
Correct.
but they could be.
They could have been.
So if our best guess is that she measured at 32 centimeters and it could be off by 3 centimeters, that could get you to 35 centimeters, and then if she has a baby approximately 2 weeks later, we might be up to 37 centimeters now.
Yes.
Is it also fair to say that some people just have smaller babies?
Yes.
And sometimes smaller people have constitutionally smaller babies.
Correct.
Just because you have a smaller baby, does that necessarily mean it was growth restricted?
No.
And have you been provided with any evidence in this case to suggest that the defendant did or did not have a smaller baby?
No.
You don't know the size of the baby
I don't
at the
know.
child's birth.
Correct.
I want to go back over one other thing. You agree when you gave the interview to the detectives, it was within a day or days of making the report to the police.
Yes.
And do you recall at that time that you didn't hesitate, you didn't think about it, but you definitively said she reported the child was born in the bedroom?
That's what I said on the video that I watched.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Rickers?
Briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Boyce, going back to charting and this fundal height measurement, if you write down a fundal height measurement in a chart, would you ever not use this measuring tape or something to actually measure the fundal height?
I wouldn't.
And this is something that you and your doctors do in your group thousands of times over the years, right?
Correct.
You asked Skylar no details about her stillbirth when she talked to you on July 12th. Is that right?
Correct.
And is it uncommon for a mother to not want to discuss the details after having a stillborn?
Everybody different after a stillborn. Sometimes they want to discuss everything, and sometimes they don't want to discuss anything.
And you have a group that I think is affiliated with your hospital. It's called HEAL.
Correct.
What is that?
HEAL stands for Help Endure a Loss, and it's a support group for people that have had miscarriages or fetal losses or newborn losses.
And you recommended, when you talked to Skylar, you recommended she get into some counseling or therapy groups, right?
Correct.
And it's not uncommon for a mother to blame herself for a stillborn. Is that right?
Correct.
One minute, Your Honor. When Skylar was with you on July 12th, and when she was crying and speaking through her tears, she told you that she delivered a baby and it was not alive. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Ms. King?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness?
Your Honor, this lady called Deputy McKay.
You may.
I do.
Mr. Mullins will be there in just a second. All right, this witness has already been sworn, right?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kraft, I think this witness has indicated that she does not wish to be filmed or photographed, right?
That is correct, Your Honor.
All right. With regard to the witnesses who are here by way of subpoena, are fact witnesses. I employ a different standard for law enforcement officers, government employees, and expert witnesses. I'm going to drag somebody here by way of subpoena. I think that it is fair for them to have the ability to decline to be photographed or filmed. With regard to the folks that are employed by the state or are being paid to be here, that standard is higher. I think that the nature of a public trial outweighs their interest in not being photographed absent some compelling reason to the contrary. So, Deputy, do we have a compelling reason why we don't want to be? You don't do undercover work, right?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Kraft.
Thank you, Your Honor. Deputy, can you please state your full name for the record, spelling your last?
Kelly McKay, McKay.
And are you employed?
Yes.
Where are you employed?
Warren County Sheriff's Office.
In what capacity?
I am the DARE officer, crime scene. I'm on the crime scene unit, and I'm also crime prevention officer as well.
Thank you. And how long have you been so employed with the Warren County Sheriff's Office?
Since 1999.
Deputy, as a member of the crime scene unit, can you please detail for the ladies and gentlemen what your duties and responsibilities are?
We photograph the crime scene, and then we collect evidence and process evidence at the crime scenes.
Does this require any advanced training or any specific courses for evidence technicians?
You just have to be an evidence technician at the time, and then throughout being on the crime scene, you have to get your
The necessary training to be an evidence technician?
Yes.
And when and where did you obtain that training?
I obtained it at Miami Valley Crime Lab in 2006.
Thank you. Deputy, I would direct your attention to July 14th of 2017 and ask if you were working on that date.
Yes.
And did you have occasion in your official capacity to respond to a residence located at 104 Eagle Ridge Drive in Carlisle, Warren County, Ohio?
Yes.
And how did you first become notified of the necessity for you to respond to that location?
We got a call out from Sergeant Namowski, who called members of the crime scene unit to respond to the sheriff's office for a death investigation.
And did you have any information at that time as to the nature of the death investigation or any of the facts and circumstances surrounding it?
All we had at the time was there was a possible stillborn baby buried in the backyard.
Was the crime scene unit in fact assembled on that date?
Yes.
And who all responded, if you recall?
Sergeant Smith, Sergeant Namowski, myself, and Deputy Katie Barnes.
And prior to going to the residence, did you meet at any specific location?
Just at the sheriff's office.
And what did you do there?
We just got together and we got the crime scene unit van and responded out there.
And then as a group, did you proceed to the location?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately what time you arrived on that date?
Approximately 2 o'clock.
Okay. And when you arrive at that location, tell me, what are you seeing? What type of house are we looking at? What is the structure?
Just a regular, it was a 2-story residence in a regular neighborhood.
What did you do upon arrival?
Me and Sergeant Smith, we tried to make contact with the residents. We did not make contact with anybody at the time. And then we just taped off the perimeter of the residence with crime scene tape.
Were you aware that a search warrant was being sought?
Yes.
Okay. While you are waiting for the search warrant, is that when you start walking the perimeter and taping it off?
Yes.
And what is your reason for doing that?
Just to preserve the crime scene at the time, make sure nobody enters at that time. We know we have a search warrant coming, so we're just waiting until it's ready to go.
At some point, did you receive notification that the search warrant had been obtained?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Can you please take a look at those? They are marked States Exhibit 4 through 55. And tell me if you recognize this.
Yes. Yes.
And are those pictures that you took on 2 different dates? And right now I want to talk about just Exhibits 4 through 40. Were those pictures that were taken on July 14th of 2017?
Yeah, these were taken the 14th.
And do they accurately depict the condition of the scene on that date?
Yes. And Sergeant Smith also took photos. We both took some of the photos.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Steve? Deputy, we're going to start with States Exhibit 4 for purposes of identification.
Okay.
Am I standing in anybody's way right now? Okay. Deputy, if you will, I want to walk through what's depicted in these photographs. And starting with States Exhibit 4, what do we see right here?
This is just the front of the residence. 2-story house.
And that is 104 Eagle Ridge Drive.
Yes.
Okay. States Exhibit 5. What are we seeing now?
This is just going towards the side of the house right now. You're looking at the side, towards the back.
The sheds that we see depicted on the left-hand side of the photo, are those part of their yard?
Yes, the one, I believe the one is.
Okay. And so that's the side view of the house looking directly back?
Yep.
States Exhibit 6.
Another side view. This is another side view of the residence going back.
That is the same shed on the far left-hand side?
Yep.
Between the shed and the brick structure of the house, there is an object in the middle of the screen that's brown in color. What is that, do you know?
I believe that's where they did some like target shooting for like bow and arrow, I think it was.
State's Exhibit 7.
This is at the back of the house by that shed and kind of looking right across the yard. And you can see the back of the house as well.
So either you or Sergeant Smith are stationed by the shed at this point, looking back towards the house?
Yep.
State's Exhibit 8.
This is the back of the property line that goes like behind that shed and straight across. This is the property line basically.
Do you recall from when you were there on that date, is there a walkway or a path worn between the shed and the tree line, if you will?
It's kind of open, like a open area there, yeah.
And then
It
there's
goes all the way back.
and then there's a tree line depicted as well?
Yes, on that edge, that's kind of like the end of the property line there was a fence, you can't see the fence, but it's mixed in with those bushes and.
Behind the tree line?
Yeah,
Okay. So that area right there, that is still a part of their property?
yes.
State's Exhibit 9.
This is just the back of that going across the back by the end of the property line.
So you're walking across the back side of the yard
Yes.
now? State's Exhibit 10.
This is the back of the house.
You're standing now on the back property line looking straight forward towards the street.
Yes.
And State's Exhibit 11, please. What is depicted in this
This
photograph?
one we're up kind of over by the side of the house looking back towards the backyard now.
You see the shed again,
Yep.
and then the target practice.
Yes.
Deputy, after you taped the property line and photographed the perimeter, did you at some point receive notification that the search warrant had been obtained?
Yes.
At that point, do you then cross over to the inside of the property line?
Yes.
And what, if anything, do you start doing at that point?
At that point, we're kind of looking for basically disturbance in the soil, towards the back of the property line is where we were looking in the area.
And if you will explain to the ladies and gentlemen, what do you mean when you say disturbance of the soil?
So we were seeing if there was any area that looked on the ground that there was any type of disturbance where the ground was loosened or there was no grass there, or the vegetation was gone, where there could have been somebody just dug up something in that area.
And was this just based on visual observation, or were there other methods undertaken to try and look for areas of disturbance?
Originally, we just did the visual, and then once we seen a couple areas that might be an interest, we then, Sergeant Namowski and Sergeant Smith used soil probes.
And what is a soil probe?
It's just like a large metal probe that you stick in the ground to see if there's any disturbance in the ground.
At that time, were there any areas of interest located?
We had a couple areas of interest at that time.
Okay.
Yes.
While you are looking for those areas of disturbance and Sergeant Smith and Namowski are using the soil probes, do you at some point receive information? Are you aware that the defendant is being interviewed while you are out on the scene?
I knew that they had her somewhere talking to her at the time, but I didn't know where exactly, but I knew they were talking to her.
Okay, as a result of that discussion that's taking place with the defendant, do you, while you guys are out there looking for areas of interest, receive some information that she had indicated she marked the site with a planter?
Yes.
And did that help you to narrow your search?
Yes, we found 2 areas from there that were of interest with 2 planters, basically like a pot that you put plants in or something.
What happened next?
And then we were told that they were bringing her to the scene to point it out.
To identify
area.
the actual burial site?
Yes.
Were you present when she arrived?
Yes.
Did you have any contact with her?
No.
Were you able to observe her demeanor?
Yes.
How would you describe her at that time?
Upset.
Visibly upset?
Yeah.
Were you able to observe her identify the burial site?
Yes.
And did she in fact identify one of the 2 sites that you had already located as areas of interest?
Yes.
I'd like you to take a look at State's Exhibit 12 for purposes of identification. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph, Deputy?
This is the area that she identified with the planter.
And if you will, is this, when we go back to the original pictures, is this in that tree line behind the path that was worn down?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a planter in the forefront of the picture
Yes.
and a yellow placard behind it with the number 2?
Mm-hmm.
And is that indicating that was one of the 2 sites?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 13 for purposes of identification. And what are we looking at in this picture?
This is where Sergeant Smith used his phone and laid it down to get the GPS coordinates.
And is that his phone laying against the number 2 placard?
Yes.
After the defendant located or pointed out the site for you, was she removed from the scene?
Yes.
At that point, do you and the fellow members of your team start the excavation process?
Yes.
Will you please explain for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what the excavation process entails?
We have to remove some of the vegetation, some of the weeds and stuff, kind of just remove those. Some of them you just cut out, and then once you find like an area, we start just basically dusting the area very gently.
Dusting with what?
Basically paintbrush, just like a little paintbrush that you just go back and forth dusting the area.
And just so everybody understands, Deputy, are you using tools, shovels? What types of instruments are you using when you're trying to look for the skeletal remains of the baby?
Well, at that time, once we pulled some of the vegetation back a little bit.
And when you say pulled back with your hands?
We seen a bone sticking out of the ground at that time. And so we just dusted that area, very shallow. It was, right there, so we just dusted that area. We didn't use any type of tools to dig anything at all.
When you started clearing the area, the vegetation and dusting, if you will, was there any noticeable odor?
There was an odor of like a decomposition.
And is this an odor that you're familiar with from your training, Deputy?
Yes, I've had aspects of forensic science, or deaths of forensics, so yeah, I've had that training.
And does death have a distinct odor, if you will?
Yes, decomposition, the tissues that die off, it puts off a strong odor.
And was that consistent with what you were smelling at that time?
Yes.
I'd like to you said that you located one bone initially.
Yes, once we pulled like the vegetation out, yes.
Okay. I'd like to take a look at State's Exhibit 14. I'm going to enlarge this a little bit, but can you tell us what is depicted in State's Exhibit 14?
This is, you can see some of bone and tissue in that one.
And, Your Honor, may I approach the witness for a second? I don't know if this would help at all, Deputy, but this is a touch screen. And as soon as you you touch it, you're gonna need instructions from the court on how to erase it, because I won't be able to give you those directions. But if you can you please, as we're going through these next photos, indicate on the screen what we're seeing?
Okay. That work? Do I have to touch something up there?
If to touch the screen, no.
I'm touching it.
Oh, you know, that may not work on, unless it's on the Elmo.
There's a little tab up here.
Doesn't.
Do I need to hit that?
It doesn't, because it's not on the elbow.
It'll only work if the picture is on the Elmo, I think.
Okay. Deputy, if I may borrow that picture for a second. Give this a try.
Every time that you put it on, you obviously can zoom in and zoom out, but make sure you always hit the autofocus with each picture. Oh, up here.
Clear all in the corner.
Gotta touch it, yeah, touch up here.
Okay, Deputy, can you show us what we're looking at in this picture? Because we see a lot of grass and debris and weeds. What is the first bone, if you will, that catches your attention?
That one right there.
Once you see that, do you continue excavating that site?
Yes.
And at this point in time, who all is present with you for the excavation?
Sergeant Nomowski, Sergeant Smith, and Deputy Katie Barnes.
Was there anybody present from the coroner's office at that time?
Yes, Investigator Doyle Burke was also present.
If you just the lower left of the screen, it'll clear it.
Can I have those photos? We're going to go through it this way. Thank you. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 15. Is that the same bone that we just saw depicted in State's Exhibit 14?
Yes.
Just a closer up of it?
Yeah.
And you said once you saw that, you guys continued to excavate the scene, again, just with hands and brushes?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 16. Can you tell us what is?
Up at the top, if you look at the top, you can see the part of the brush. That's where you just started gently brushing back and forth.
And as you're brushing back and forth, there appears to be a smoother surface there?
Yes, it appeared
Different
to,
from the dirt that's surrounding it?
yes, and it appeared to be Investigator Doyle Burke and asked him if maybe that was the skull.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 17 for purposes of identification. What are you pointing to in that picture?
At the time, the area is the skull where we were dusting at.
The same smooth surface that was depicted in the prior picture?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 18 for purposes of identification? What is
That's
depicted?
a piece of the skull right up there.
And Deputy, if you will, just to put this in perspective, I know that you said you were using your hands and small tools, and we see what appears to be almost like a small paintbrush, if you will.
Yes.
How far down are you having to dig before you are
Not-
finding these
Not
bone
at all,
pieces?
very shallow. We just basically dusted. There was nothing to dig. I mean, the surface.
Did you ever have to use any tools beyond your hands or your brushes?
No.
So this was a fairly shallow grave?
Yes.
And do you continue to just dust down layer by layer?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 19 for purposes of identification.
Up here, up at the top is the skull.
And do you know, we're starting to see areas of white mixed in with the dirt. Do you have any information as to what that is?
It's just part of the tissue from like the decay.
You indicated that Investigator Burke from the coroner's office was present with you.
Yes.
When you are dusting and finding what appear to be skull pieces, do you bring that to his attention? Is he present as you're,
Yeah, he was right there.
okay? And what, if anything, is done at that point? Are there any decisions made about what we're going to do or
he
how we're going
removed
to
the
proceed with
pieces.
this investigation?
Yeah, actually, Doyle Burke, he actually removed pieces. And then once they removed a few of the pieces, he contacted Dr. Updegrove, and he actually responded to the scene. We halted everything at that time until Dr. Updegrove arrived on the scene.
And just so everybody is clear, is Dr. Updegrove the coroner for Warren County?
Yes.
Okay. You said that Investigator Burke actually removed the skull pieces from the burial site?
Yes.
Were you present when those pieces were
Yes.
showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 20 for purposes of identification? Can you tell us what is depicted in that picture, Deputy?
That is a piece of the skull.
And Investigator Burke removed that?
Yes.
You were present and photographed it?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 21 for purposes of identification. What are we looking at?
Another piece of the skull.
And you say another, did you find multiple pieces of skull?
Yes.
Deputy, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 22 for purposes of identification. What are we seeing depicted in this photograph?
Another piece of the skull.
And again, using hands and brushes, you're just continuing to go down layer by layer, and then Investigator Burke is removing the skull pieces.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 23 for purposes of identification.
A piece of the skull.
And State's Exhibit 24 for purposes of identification.
But that was a piece of the skull as well.
Is that the underside of it?
Yes.
You indicated once Investigator Burke removed those skull pieces, they were photographed and then the excavation was halted?
Yes.
And that was until Coroner Updegrove could arrive at the scene?
Yes.
Did Coroner Updegrove in fact respond to the scene while you were still present?
Yes.
And once he was there, did he take over responsibility for the excavation?
Yes.
What was your role at that point?
At that point, like I said, me and Sergeant Smith, we were taking photographs. So me and him were taking photographs. Once a bone was removed, we photographed it.
Deputy, after the skull pieces were removed, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 25, was that the condition of the burial site when you halted the excavation and waited for Dr. Updegrove to arrive?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. After Investigator Burke removed the skull pieces that he
Yes.
was able to find, was that the condition of the burial site when you determined to when he made the determination to halt the excavation until Coroner
Yes.
Updegrove arrived?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said once Coroner Updegrove got there, he takes over the excavation and you are photographing at that point?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 26 for purposes of identification. Can you tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
This is basically the small body bag where they're laying the bones in the bag.
And is,
The
I mean,
skull pieces.
so do you bring a small body bag to the site?
We did not. Doyle Burke had that.
Investigator Burke?
Yes.
And then is that what's used to collect the skeletal remains?
Yes.
Once Dr. Updegrove takes over retrieval, you are photographing. Were those the first few bones that were then pulled out?
Yes.
Do you continue to photograph as he finds additional bones?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 30 for purposes of identification. What is depicted in this photograph, Deputy?
All the bones that were taken from the area.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 36. Do you continue to just collect small bones?
We were taking the photos as Dr. Updegrove was pulling out. all the
Was it
bones.
difficult to identify what some of these were with the overgrowth and the twigs and everything else?
For us, yes, but Dr. Updegrove, I believe, he was able to identify all this.
Once these bones were collected,
Then with dirt,
with the dirt that had been removed,
yeah.
and Deputy, if you know, who took custody of the remains on July 14th?
Investigator Doyle Burke.
Once the excavation was completed, did you assist with anything else at the crime scene on that date?
Yes, we went into the garage and took 3 garden tools.
And what was your reason for taking garden tools from the garage?
Lieutenant Fain at the time had asked us to take some garden tools out of the garage that could have been used.
Based on information that was being provided at the interview?
Yes.
Deputy, showing what's been marked as State's Exhibit 37 for purposes of identification, can you identify what is depicted in that photograph?
The inside of the garage.
Okay. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 38 for purposes of identification. Can you tell us what is depicted in this photograph?
That was just a bucket that had several garden tools.
And these were located within the garage.
Yes.
And showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 39 for purposes of identification. Can you tell us what we're looking at?
Those are the 3 tools.
Photographing those, you don't know that those were the garden tools that were used by the defendant, do you?
No, correct.
You just know that she's provided information that there were garden tools used.
Correct.
Did you provide any other assistance with regards to processing the crime scene on July 14th of 2017, Deputy?
Just taking in some of the electronics that some of the detectives have taken from them.
From
We just put
inside
them
of the
in-
residence?
Yeah, we just put them into bags and labeled them.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 40 for purposes of identification. Were those the electronic items that were located on July 14th that you photographed?
Yes.
And again, do you yourself know if those particular electronics have any relationship to
No.
the child's death?
No.
Deputy, if you will, approximately how long were you at the scene on July 14th?
Approximately 6 hours.
Okay. Directing your attention to July 24th of 2017. On that date, did you again have occasion to respond to the Richardson residence located at 104 Eagle Ridge Drive in Carlisle, Ohio?
Yes.
And again, was this in your official capacity with the crime scene unit?
Yes.
And what was your reason for going out there on that date?
Again, to collect more evidence and process the scene, take photographs.
Were you aware that a third search warrant had been obtained on that date?
Yes.
And on that date, were you primarily inside of the residence?
Not in the beginning of it, no. In the beginning of the search warrant, I was primarily outside in the van, and they were bringing electronics out, and Sergeant Smith was photographing them. Detective Wong was getting serial numbers off of all the electronics, and I was basically labeling and putting them in the evidence bags.
Okay, so let me back up for a second. Who all was present on that date from the crime scene unit, if you recall?
On that day, Sergeant Smith, myself, and Deputy Hammonds.
And I believe you mentioned a Deputy Wong?
He's actually a detective.
He is not part of the crime scene unit?
No, he's one of the
But he was
detectives.
present
Yes,
on that date?
he was present.
Okay, thank you. And do you recall approximately what time you got to the residence on that date?
I think it was like 6:30, right around there.
Okay. And then I believe you said you started out by processing or cataloging some of the electronic evidence with Detective Wong.
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as states.
Detectives wrote whose phone it was on there.
And that indicates that that is Mom's work phone?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 54 for purposes of identification.
Again, it was brought out to us. They marked whose phone it was.
And that indicates Brandon Saylor.
Yes.
At that time, did you have any information as to who Brandon Saylor was?
No.
And deputy, showing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 55 for purposes of identification. What is in that phone?
Mom's phone. That was again brought out to us.
Thank you. And photograph and catalog the electronic devices that were coming out of the home, did you then proceed into the residence?
Yes, once they were going basically to the second floor, yes.
And at that time, were you assisting with the processing?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that the second floor processing was primarily handled by Sergeant John Smith?
Yes.
Deputy, after the crime scene unit completed the processing of the scene on July 24th, did you have any further involvement in the investigation of this case?
No.
Your Honor, if I may have a moment. Nothing further? Thank you.
Mr. Rickers, you may inquire.
Deputy McKay,
Hi.
I only have a couple questions. Did I hear you correctly when the prosecutor was asking you questions that when you were at the home of Skylar Richardson, you received a call? Was that a call that said that the grave site had been marked with a flower pot? Did I hear you?
I didn't receive that call. One of the sergeants received a call from, I believe, Lieutenant Fain, someone who was actually speaking with her at wherever she was at the time.
Okay.
They called and relayed the message.
That the grave site was marked with a flower pot?
Yes.
Were you aware of any investigation regarding this case around May 7th?
No.
Were you aware of any reason to believe that an investigation involving Skylar Richardson was about to begin on May 7th?
No.
Skylar, when she arrived at the scene, she took, I guess it was Detective Fain, directly to show where the
No.
gravesite was?
No, actually, the Carlisle officer,
Officer
Katie
Gee.
was, yeah, She was actually walking with her.
Okay, and she went directly to show you where it was?
Yes.
And she was very cooperative?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Anything else for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Step down, thank you. Probably makes sense to take an afternoon break, right? You can just leave those there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for about 15 minutes. Remember what I had previously told you. Do not begin discussing the case amongst yourselves or begin to think about how the case should be decided. And we'll see everybody back here at 2:35. Of the testimony of Deputy McKay, the defense made objection at sidebar regarding items that had previously been discussed, regarding motions in limine and so forth. Mr. Rickers, who's going to be making our objection? All right, go ahead, Mr. Shute. The court is going to treat this objection as being timely filed and grant the defense a continuing objection as to the photos with regard to the matters we're going to talk about.
Yes, Your Honor. First, on the continuing use of the word victim and crime scene, I believe exhibits 5 through 11 all depicted the tape that had been the basis of the motion and to refer to it as a crime scene. Do you want to go one by one, or how did you want to proceed?
I mean, that's fine. I mean,
Okay.
I've already instructed the jury that what the lawyers say is not evidence. I actually told them specifically that they may hear the lawyers talk about a victim or a crime scene, and it's their job to figure out what's what. So I'm going to overrule the objection in that regard. What's that?
We had mentioned items that were collected. Deputy McKay did not go into those items, so we'll reserve that for the next time that they're brought up,
Okay,
Your Honor.
anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, anything from the state?
No, Your Honor.
All right, and we'll be back at 2:35 to resume with more crime scene photography, right?
Judge, we have, for crime scene purposes, we have 2 more crime scene people that are going to testify, and Dr. Updegrove is on his way here. He had to actually testify in another county this morning, and he was there till lunch. He is on his way here. We're not able to have any more here today.
Okay. All right. In terms of the presentation, I don't know that we've ever had that come up before, that somebody's tried to use the little telestrator when it wasn't on the Elmo, but I think you might want to check that out on the break, but it does not seem like if you're at a laptop council that you can draw on the screen and have it show up. But that's a new one for me, so we've never had that come up.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Your Honor.
we're in recess, see everybody at 2:35.